Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is the What Can I Do podcast book club. And tonight we're going to be reading The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. Woman as Other. We're going to be reading her introduction. For a long time, I've hesitated to write a book on woman. The subject is irritating, especially to women, and it is not new. Enough ink has been spilled in quarreling over feminism, and perhaps we should say no more about it. It's still talked about, however, for the voluminous nonsense uttered during the last century seems to have done little to illuminate the problem. And was reminding me of Frederick Douglass saying about how he's not going to argue that black people are people. He's not going to argue that people ought not to be slaves because, well, duh. And he did give some evidence for the former, but not the latter. And, well, duh. Actually, the evidence wasn't that black people were people. The evidence was that white people and white supremacists know that black people are people. Important distinction. So, de Beauvoir. After all, is there a problem? And if so, what is it? Are there women, really? Most assuredly, the theory of the eternal feminine still has its adherents who will whisper in your ear. Even in Russia, women are still women. Another erudite person, sometimes the very same, say with a sigh, woman is losing her way, woman is lost. One wonders if women still exist, if they will always exist, whether or not it is desirable that they should, what place they occupy in the world, what their place should be, what has become of women, was recently asked in an ephemeral magazine. But first we must ask, what is a woman? Is it interesting that that's asked of candidates and things where someone like Nancy Mace, I guess, will say, well, what is a woman? Like it's a gotcha question because she's so sure she knows what it is, probably relying on gonads mostly. And in fact, she's mostly relying on secondary sexual characteristics like titties and a female face, feminine type face, because she's not looking at anybody's gonads. But first we must ask, what is a woman? Tota mulier in utero. Sounds like it means it's formed at birth, but let's see. Woman is a womb. Well, that's not what I thought that meant. So not so much the woman in utero, but the woman's utero. Woman is a womb. But in speaking of certain women, connoisseurs declare that they are not women, although they are equipped with a uterus like the rest. I'm so interested in some point looking back and applying this to trans women and even trans men to see what she says and how that could apply, or does it apply? Perhaps it does not. All agree in recognizing the fact that females exist in the human species. Today, as always, they make up about 1/2 of humanity. And yet, we are told that femininity is in danger. We are exhorted to be women, remain women, become women. It would appear then that every female human being is not necessarily a woman. To be so considered, she must share in that mysterious and threatened reality known as femininity. Is this attribute something secreted by the ovaries, or is a platonic essence, a product of the philosophic imagination? Is a rustling petticoat enough to bring it down to earth? Although some women try zealously to incarnate this essence, it's hardly patentable. It is frequently described in vague and dazzling terms that seem to have been borrowed from the vocabulary of the seers. And indeed, in the times of St. Thomas, it was considered an essence, as certainly defined as the somniferous virtue. I guess it's somniferous. I bet it is. The somniferous virtue of the poppy. But conceptualism has lost ground. The biological and social sciences no longer admit the existence of unchangeably fixed entities that determine such characteristics, such as those ascribed to woman, the Jew, or the Negro. And this is why freedom or oppression of one is oppression of all, and no one can be free till we're all free. They've said what we all are, whether we're women or Jews or black or indigenous, or whether we practice this religion or that religion, anything that the they can make I was going to say, well, they're the ones making someone else the they, but the they that we're talking about, the supremacists, are able to other any group that they want or any person they want and make them different and make them less, and that's the whole point. And they've given everyone characteristics. And they, of course, they, them, the white men, the white Christian men specifically, although Men of other religions, particularly the Abrahamic ones, but men, the patriarchy is arrogant, supremacist, and violent. Prove me wrong. Science regards any characteristic as a reaction, dependent in part upon a situation. If today femininity no longer exists, then it never existed. But does the word woman, then, have no specific content? This is stoutly affirmed by those who hold to the philosophy of the Enlightenment, of rationalism, of nominalism. Women, to them, are merely the human beings arbitrarily designated by the word woman. Many American women, particularly, are prepared to think that there is no longer any place for woman as such. If a backward individual still takes herself for a woman, her friends advise her to be psychoanalyzed and thus get rid of this obsession. In regard to a work, Modern Woman, The Lost Sex, which in other respects has its irritating features, Dorothy Parker has written, I cannot be just to books which treat of woman as woman. My idea is that all of us, men as well as women, should be regarded as human beings. But nominalism is a rather inadequate doctrine, and the anti-feminists have had no trouble in showing that women simply are not men. Surely woman is like man, a human being, but such a declaration is abstract, or a waffle word, if you will. The fact is that every concrete human being is always a singular, separate individual. To decline to accept such notions as the eternal feminine, the black soul, the Jewish character, is not to deny that Jews, Negroes, women exist today. This denial does not represent deliberation for those concerned, but rather a flight from reality. Some years ago, a well-known woman writer refused to permit her portrait to appear in a series of photographs especially devoted to women writers. Sorry, I'm moving the page up. She wished to be counted among the men. No, she wished to be counted among the default humans, but yes. But in order to gain this privilege, she made use of her husband's influence. Women who assert that they are men lay claim nonetheless to masculine consideration and respect. I recall also a young Trotskyite standing on a platform at a boisterous meeting and getting ready to use her fists in spite of her evident fragility. She was denying her feminine weakness, but it was for love of a militant male whose equal she wished to be. The attitude of defiance of many American women proves they are haunted by a sense of their femininity. In truth, to go for a walk with one's eyes open is enough to demonstrate that humanity is divided into two classes of individuals whose clothes, faces, bodies, smiles, gaits, interests, and occupations are manifestly different. Perhaps these differences are superficial. Perhaps they are destined to disappear. What is certain is that they do most obviously exist. I hated that as a kid. I still don't like it. I mostly don't like it. That's a complicated thing, and I'm not explaining it here, my dislike. If her functioning as a female is not enough to define woman, if we decline also to explain her through the eternal feminine, and if nevertheless we admit provisionally that women do exist, then we must face the question, what is a woman? To state the question is, to me, to suggest at once a preliminary answer. The fact that I ask it is in itself significant. A man would never set out to write a book on the peculiar situation of the human male. Not then. Maybe later they did, but not then. But she's saying that men are the default, and so therefore you say, what about women? But if I wish to define myself, I must first of all say I am a woman. On this truth must be based all further discussion. A man never begins by presenting himself as an individual of a certain sex. It goes without saying that he's a man. The terms masculine and feminine are used symmetrically only as a matter of forms, as on legal papers. In actuality, the relation of the two sexes is not quite like that of two electrical poles, for man represents both the positive and the neutral, as is indicated by the common use of man to designate human beings in general, whereas woman represents only the negative, defined by limiting criteria without reciprocity. Other than the womb part, that's different. I mean, we are the givers of life in that sense. We're not just men without penises, just saying. Note, I consider myself part of that even though I don't. It's the binary system, and if I had to have chosen, and I've always had to have chosen, and there are things that make it so much that to me. It's very complex, is it not? In the midst of an abstract discussion, it's vexing to hear a man say, "You think thus and so because you are a woman." But I know that my only defense is to reply, "I think thus and so because it is true," thereby removing my subjective self from the argument. It'd be out of the question to reply, "And you think the contrary because you are a man." Well, it was then. Not so anymore, because she's defining without defining the patriarchy, and she's not claiming that they're enculturated by it, although she is, but she isn't. She says it's understood that the fact of being a man is no peculiarity, meaning that they're the default again. A man is in the right in being a man. It is the woman who is in the wrong. It amounts to this. Just as for the ancients, there was an absolute vertical with reference to which the oblique was defined, so there is an absolute human type, the masculine. Woman has ovaries, a uterus. These peculiarities imprison her in her subjectivity, circumscribe her within the limits of her own nature. And see, now I don't think she's saying what she believes. I think she's saying what our culture seems to tell us. It's often said that she thinks with her glands. Men superbly ignores the fact that his anatomy also includes glands, such as the testicles, and that they secrete hormones. He thinks of his body as a direct and normal connection with the world, which he believes he apprehends objectively, whereas he regards the body of a woman as a hindrance, a prison, weighed down by everything peculiar to it. The female is a female by virtue of a certain lack of quality, said Aristotle. We should regard the female nature as afflicted with a natural defectiveness. And St. Thomas, for his part, pronounced woman to be an imperfect man, an incidental being. Okay. This is symbolized in Genesis, where Eve is depicted as made from what Beauvoir called a supernumerary bone of Adam. Does supernumerary mean extra? You know, when I hit an odd word, I usually have to... Present in excess of the normal or requisite number. Long-winded way of saying extra in this case. But superfluous is a good word. Numeric superfluity. Thus, humanity is male, and man defines woman not in herself, but as a relative to him. That is so egocentric. Or gender-centric, or however you want to put it, but it's so egocentric. She is not regarded as an autonomous being, Michelet writes. Woman, the relative being, and woman, the relative being. And Benda is most positive in his Rapport de Réal. The body of man makes sense in itself quite apart from that of a woman, whereas the latter seems wanting in significance by itself. Man can think of himself without woman. She cannot think of herself without man. Really? And what birth canal did you come out of to think of yourself without a woman? That's why, though. And she is simply what man decrees. Thus she is called the sex, by which is meant that she appears essentially to the male as a sexual being. For him she is sex, absolute sex, no less. She is defined and differentiated with reference to man, and not he with reference to her. She is the incidental, the inessential, as opposed to the essential. He is the subject, he is the absolute, she is the other. Okay. I'm not real happy with that, or hearing that, or thinking that. Talk about othering. Literally. The category of the other. Wait. The category of the other is as primordial as consciousness itself. In the most primitive societies, in the most ancient mythologies, one finds the expression of a duality, that of the self and the other. This duality was not originally attached to the division of the sexes. It was not dependent upon any empirical facts. It was revealed in such works as that of Granet on Chinese thought, and those of de Maisel on the East Indies and Rome. The feminine element was at first no more involved in such pairs as Varuna Mitra, Uranus, Zeus, Sun, Moon, and Day Night than it was in the contrast between good and evil, lucky and unlucky auspices, right and left, God and Lucifer. Otherness is a fundamental category of human thought. Thus it is that no group ever sets itself up as the one without at once setting up the other over against itself. If three travelers chance to occupy the same compartment, that is enough to make vaguely hostile others out of all the rest of the passengers on the train. Oh, I see. Right, the three travelers form a little group. In small town eyes, all persons not belonging to the village are strangers and suspect. To the native of a country, all who inhabit other countries are foreigners. Jews are different for the anti-Semite. Negroes are inferior for American racists. Aborigines are natives for colonists. Proletarians are the lower class for the privileged. Yeah, Leslie was right, and I was wrong that day. I meant the bourgeoisie. Levi Strauss, at the end of a profound work on the various forms of primitive societies, reaches the following conclusion. Passage from the state of nature to the state of culture is marked by man's ability to view biological relations as a series of contrasts. Duality, alternation, opposition, and symmetry, whether under definite or vague forms, constitute not so much phenomena to be explained as fundamental and immediately given data of social reality. So we're delving deep into the philosophical explanations of things about the other. I'm not convinced that this is really helping us at what we want to do right now. But let's say what this says right here. Women, they have gained only what men have been willing to grant. They have taken nothing, they have only received. The reason for this is that women lack concrete means for organizing themselves into a unit which can stand face to face with the correlative unit. They have no past, no history, no religion of their own, and they have no such solidarity of work and interest as that of the proletariat. They're not even promiscuously herded together in the way that creates community feeling among the American Negroes, the ghetto Jews, the workers of Saint Denis, or the factory hands of Renault. They live dispersed among the males, attached through residence, housework, economic condition, and social standing to certain men, fathers or husbands, more firmly than they are to other women. And that right there is a huge part of the message of The Handmaid's Tale. Not the worry that we're going to become just like them, but the worry that we are like this, which is like them in a metaphoric, less hyperbolic way. If they belong to the bourgeoisie, they feel solidarity with men of that class, not with proletarian women. If they are white, their allegiance is to white men, not to Negro women. The proletariat can propose to massacre the ruling class, and a sufficiently fanatical Jew or Negro might dream of getting sole possession of the atomic bomb and making humanity wholly Jewish or black, but women cannot even dream of exterminating the males. The bond that unites her to her oppressors is not comparable to any other. The division of the sexes is a biological fact, not an event in human history. Male and female stand opposed within a primordial mitzin. M-I-T-S-E-I-N, mitzin. I want to say some kind of agreement, like a blood agreement of some kind. A fund of human existence. That our identity is always co-constructed by the presence of others in the social world, making it a primary ontological condition rather than an optional social interaction. So it just is what it is. A woman has not broken it. The couple is a fundamental unity with its two halves riveted together, and the cleavage of society along the lines of sex is impossible. So far, I don't know if science is going to make it more possible because things are happening. For example, there's artificial wombs. We don't know which, the egg or the sperm, is going to be able to do something. It's a little scary. If There are certain groups of men that I don't think it's a good idea if they're able to create children in any way. But I'm not saying there aren't women like that. I was being very specific. Here is to be found the basic trait of woman. She is the other in a totality of which the two components are necessary to one another. One could suppose that this reciprocity might have facilitated the liberation of woman when Hercules sat at the feet of Omphale and helped her with her spinning. His desire for her held him captive. But why did she fail to gain a lasting power? To revenge herself on Jason, Medea killed their children, and this grim legend would seem to suggest that she might have obtained a formidable influence over him through his love for his offspring. In Lysistrata, Aristophanes gaily depicts a band of women who join forces to gain social ends through the sexual needs of their men, but this is only a play. In the legend of the Sabine women, the latter soon abandoned their plan of remaining sterile to punish their ravishers. In truth, woman has not been socially emancipated through man's need. Sexual desire and the desire for offspring, that need, which makes the male dependent for satisfaction upon the female. Master and slave also are united by a reciprocal need, in this case economic, which does not liberate the slave. In the relation of master to slave, the master does not make a point of the need that he has for the other. He has in his grasp the power of satisfying this need through his own action, whereas the slave in his dependent condition, his hope and fear, is quite conscious of the need he has for his master. Even if the need is at the bottom equally urgent for both, it always works in favor of the oppressor and against the oppressed. That is why the liberation of the working class, for example, has been slow. So the power imbalance is potent. Now, woman has always been man's dependent, if not his slave. The two sexes have never shared the world in equality. And even today, woman is heavily handicapped, though her situation is beginning to change. Almost nowhere is her legal status the same as man's, and frequently it is much to her disadvantage. And even when her rights are legally recognized in the abstract, long-standing custom prevents their full expression in the mores. In the economic sphere, page, men and women can almost be said to make up two castes. Other things being equal, the former hold the better jobs, get higher wages, and have more opportunity for success than their new competitors. In industry and politics, men have a great many more positions, and they monopolize the most important posts. In addition to all this, they enjoy a traditional prestige that the education of children tends in every way to support, for the present enshrines the past. In the past, all history has been made by men. All written down history has been written down and therefore considered to have been made by men. At the present time, when women are beginning to take part in the affairs of the world, it is still a world that belongs to men. They have no doubt of it at all, and women have scarcely any. To decline to be the other, to refuse to be a party to the deal, this would be for women to renounce all the advantages conferred upon them by their allegiance with the superior caste. Rather than going into more detail on that, that's an excellent spot right there. She goes through now a bunch of history. In the bosom of the family, woman seems in the eyes of childhood and youth to be clothed. I like that one. In the bosom of the family, woman seems in the eyes of childhood and youth to be clothed in the same social dignity as the adult males. Later on, the young man, desiring and loving, experiences the resistance, the independence of the woman desired and loved. In marriage, he respects woman as wife and mother, and in the concrete events of conjugal life, she stands there before him as a free being. He can therefore feel that social subordination is between the sexes no longer exists, and that on the whole, in spite of differences, woman is an equal. As, however, he observes some points of inferiority, the most important being unfitness for the professions, he attributes these to natural causes. When he is in a cooperative and benevolent relationship with women, his theme is the principle of abstract equality, and he does not base his attitude upon such inequality as may exist. But when he's in conflict with her, the situation is reversed. His theme will be the existing inequality, and he will take it as justification for denying abstract equality. So it is that many men will affirm, as if in good faith, that women are the equals of man, and that they have nothing to clamor for, while at the same time will say that women can never be the equals of man, and their demands are in vain. It is in point of fact a difficult matter for man to realize the extreme importance of social discrimination, which seems outwardly insignificant, but which produce in women moral and intellectual effects so profound they appear to spring from her original nature. The most sympathetic of men never fully comprehend woman's concrete situation, and there's no reason to put much trust in the men when they rush to the defense of privileges whose full extent they can hardly measure. Analogous to white privilege here. Analogous reasoning, and analogous denseness, and analogous lack of the privileged group to even begin to understand or recognize it. We shall not then permit ourselves to be intimidated by the number and violence of the attacks launched against women, nor to be entrapped by the self-seeking eulogies bestowed on the true woman, nor to profit by the enthusiasm for woman's destiny manifested by men who would not for the world have any part of it. We should consider the arguments of the feminists with no less suspicion, however, for very often their controversial aim deprives them of real value. If the woman question seems trivial, it's because masculine arrogance has made of it a quarrel, and when quarreling, one no longer reasons well. People have tirelessly sought to prove that woman is superior, inferior, or equal to man. Some say that having been created after Adam, she's evidently a secondary being. Others say that, on the contrary, that Adam was only a rough draft and that God succeeded in producing the human being in perfection when he created Eve. Yeah, but first you have to believe in Adam and Eve and God and all that. And if you don't believe in any of that, then all of that is hooey. Woman's brain is smaller, yes, but it's relatively larger. Christ was made a man, yes, but perhaps for his great humility. Each argument at once suggests its opposite, and both are often fallacious. If we are to gain understanding, we must get out of these ruts. We must discard the vague notions of superiority, inferiority, equality, which have hitherto corrupted every discussion of the subject, and start afresh. Hear, hear. Very well, but just how shall we pose the question? And to begin with, who are we to propound it at all? Who are we to propound it at all? Man is at once judge and party to the case, but so is woman. What we need is an angel, neither man nor woman, but where shall we find one? Still, the angel will be poorly qualified to speak, for an angel is ignorant of all the basic facts involving the problem. With a hermaphrodite, we should be no better off, for here the situation is most peculiar. The hermaphrodite is not really the combination of a whole man and a whole woman, but consists of parts of each, and thus is neither. It looks to me as if there are, after all, certain women who are best qualified to elucidate the situation of woman. Let us not be misled by the sophism that because Epimenides was a Cretan, he was necessarily a liar. It is not a mysterious essence that compels men and women to act in good or in bad faith. It is their situation that inclines them more or less toward the search for truth. Many of today's women, fortunate in the restoration of all the privileges pertaining to the estate of the human being, can afford the luxury of impartiality. We even recognize its necessity. We are no longer like our partisan elders. By and large, we've won the game. In recent debates on the status of women, the United Nations has persistently maintained that the equality of the sexes has now become a reality. And already, some of us have never had to sense in our femininity an inconvenience or an obstacle. Many problems appear to us to be more pressing than those which concern us in particular, and this detachment even allows us to hope that our attitude will be objective. Still, we know the feminine world more intimately than do the men, because we have our roots in it. We grasp more immediately than do men what it means to a human being to be feminine, and we're more concerned with such knowledge. I have said that there are more pressing problems, but this does not prevent us from seeing some importance in asking how the fact of being women will affect our lives. What opportunities precisely have been given us and what withheld? What fate awaits our younger sisters, and what direction should they take? It is significant that books by women on women are in general animated in our day less by a wish to demand our rights than by an effort toward clarity and understanding. As we emerge from an era of excessive controversy, this book is offered as one attempt among others to confirm that statement. But it is doubtless impossible to approach any human problem with a mind free from bias. Right, because tabula rasa is not a thing. ever. There is no freedom from bias. If it hurt you on the way out of the vagina, it's going to bias something. The way in which questions are put, the points of view assumed, presuppose a relativity of interest. All characteristics imply values. And every objective description, so-called, implies an ethical background. Rather than attempt to conceal principles more or less definitely implied, it's better to state them openly at the beginning. This will make it unnecessary to specify on every page in just what sense one uses such words as superior, inferior, better, worse, progress, reaction, and the like. If we survey some of the works on woman, we note that one of the points of view most frequently adopted is that of the public good, the general interest, and one always means by this the benefit of society as one wishes it to be maintained or established. For our part, we hold that the only public good is that which assures the private good of all the citizens. We shall pass judgment on institutions according to their effectiveness in giving concrete opportunities to individuals. But we do not confuse the idea of private interest with that of happiness, although that is another common point of view. Are not women of the harem more happy than women voters? Is not the housekeeper happier than the working woman? It is not too clear just what the word happy really means, and still less what true values it may mask. There is no possibility of measuring the happiness of others, and it's always easy to describe as happy the situation in which one wishes to place them. In particular, those who are condemned to stagnation are often pronounced happy on the pretext that happiness consists in being at rest. This notion we reject, for our perspective is that of existentialist ethics. Every subject plays his part as much specifically through exploits or projects that serve as a mode of transcendence. He achieves liberty only through a continual reaching out toward other liberties. There is no justification for present existence other than its expansion into an indefinitely open future. There is no justification for present existence other than its expansion into an indefinitely open future. Every time transcendence falls back into immanent stagnation, there's a degradation of existence into the en soi. The en soi, the brutish life of subjection to given conditions, and of liberty into constraint and contingence. This downfall represents a moral fault if the subject consents to it. If it's inflicted upon him, it spells frustration, oppression. In both cases, it is an absolute evil. Every individual concerned to justify his existence feels that his existence involves an undefined need to transcend himself, to engage in freely chosen projects. That is very dense and requires a bit of digging. Now, what peculiarly signalizes the situation of woman is that she, a free and autonomous being like all human creatures, nevertheless finds herself living in a world where men compel her to assume the status of the other. They propose to stabilize her as object and to doom her to immanence. All right, it's not imminence like right now. It is immanence, and I ignored it once, and I don't know what it means, so I cannot ignore it again. So immanence is the philosophical and theological concept that divine or active forces are inherent, indwelling, and present within the material world and human consciousness. So they want her to be an object and tell her that that's just the way it is. That's the way women are. That's the way humans are. That's the way God wants you to be, all that. Since her transcendence is to be overshadowed and forever transcended by another ego, which is essential and sovereign. The drama of woman lies in this conflict between the fundamental aspirations of every subject, ego, who always regards the self as the essential, and the compulsions of a situation in which she is the inessential. How can a human being in woman's situation attain fulfillment? What roads are open to her, which are blocked? How can independence be recovered in a state of dependency? What circumstances limit woman's liberty, and how can they be overcome? These are the fundamental questions on which I would fain throw some light. That means I'm interested in the fortunes of the individual as defined not in terms of happiness, but in terms of liberty. Hmm. Interesting, that word fain that she uses, F-A-I-N, it reminds me of finna. That's more in Southern English, or at least Black English. I'm not sure exactly, but it shows linguistic roots to finna. Quite evidently, this problem would be without significance if we were to believe that woman's destiny is inevitably determined by physiological, psychological, or economic forces. Hence, I shall discuss first of all the light in which woman is viewed by biology, psychoanalysis, and historical materialism. Next, I shall try to show exactly how the concept of the true feminine has been fashioned, why woman has been defined as the other, and what have been the consequences from man's point of view. Then, from woman's point of view, I shall describe the world in which women must live, and thus we shall be able to envisage, as the more academic word, the difficulties in their way as endeavoring to make their escape from the sphere hitherto assigned to them, they aspire to full membership in the human race. I have to go back. That paragraph was a lot. The probability. Oh, right. So why would we talk about it if we thought it was her destiny and that she was determined by all these things? So her book is going to discuss how woman is viewed by biology, psychoanalysis, and historical materialism. And then how the concept of truly feminine has been fashioned, why woman is defined as the other, and what have been the consequences from man's point of view. And here I don't know if she means man, males, or man, humans. Then from woman's point of view, I shall describe the world in which women must live. So I think what she's saying is she's going to talk about history and quote unquote science from a dude's point of view. And then she's going to describe what that has made life, what it's like to live that life as a woman. And thus we shall be able to envisage the difficulties in their way as endeavoring to make their escape from the sphere hitherto assigned them, they aspire to full membership in the human race. They're still aspiring. That's why we won't go back. We won't go back.